Hi friends, it's Deanna Williston with Our Blooming Catholic Life, and today's another day where we're doing an environmental book review. This was a book I was very excited to get. It's by Richard, I don't know how to pronounce that, Louv. Our Wild Calling. You may remember this author. He's the one who wrote The Last Child in the Woods. I feel like that was in the 90s. That was such a cutting edge book at the time. That's my memory of it. I haven't read it recently. Don't quote me on it. 'Cause, sometimes you go back and you have a different opinion of things. I will say, it was really, it's right here, how connecting with animals can transform our lives and save theirs. Of the three books that were choices for my monthly subscription box this month, this is the one I really wanted. And I do remember loving Last Child in the Woods and reading it often when I worked at a naturalist as a nature center. So the book came, and I will say I couldn't figure this out. This book cover has a texture to it. It also has a life of its own. Like, it doesn't behave. It's actually crinkling the pages. This is like plastic. I'm not sure what it is, but I find it very disturbing. It's interrupting my book enjoying experience, but if I take it off, I kind of lose that handy bookmark. And also I wanted to keep it on here so I could show you. Tons of reviews back here. I don't know that any of them meant anything to me, and you can find them online, but people are like, oh yes, this is amazing. This is it. This is exactly what I wanted to say. Blah, blah, blah. It has people from the director of the U.S. National Park Service, the best-selling author of Unlikely Friendships. I think we've all seen those. There's multiple species of animals being friends. Beyond Words, What Animals Think and Feel, Earth and Mind, Rewilding Our Hearts. Robert Bateman's Canada. Like they're like, this is the time for this book. This is so amazing. And it's basically saying, I'll read a little bit here from the jacket. I feel confident we're allowed to do that. Let's jump down here. Okay. It explores the powerful and mysterious bonds we share with all living creatures and how strengthening them can transform our mental, physical, and spiritual lives, serve as an antidote to the growing epidemic of human loneliness as individuals and as a species, and help us to tap into the empathy required to preserve life on Earth. And empathy is one thing that I've always wondered with the environmental movement. When I was in college and did door-to-door canvassing for an environmental lobbying group, I know it was very odd when I'd go to very poor neighborhoods, those who even had like electric power plants and smokestacks in their things, they would give me their last dime. They would give me their stamps, their pens, rolls of toilet paper for the office, anything they could to contribute to the cause for cleaning up the environment. When I went into very rich neighborhoods, like places I didn't even know existed. It was so funny when we'd get dropped off in these neighborhood friends, and you'd have to like climb like a mile-long driveway, and then you'd get to a gate with a buzzer and a little microphone you'd have to speak into. I was so confused by those. Those people tended to give me extra food out of their garden, or like, man, they'd think about it. They were obviously a little hippie, even though they lived in very nice places. I did eat well off that fresh produce. I was very much living paycheck to paycheck to then, so I loved giving that fresh produce that they would give me. But so they were supporting me, but not necessarily the cause. And those in suburbia, they were the least likely to contribute anything except pens with their business's name on it. They would contribute those. And so I think it's interesting. Those who had the worst environment possible really wanted to clean it up. Those who lived in, of course, pristine places didn't see the real need for it, but they did have empathy for me as a struggling person going door to door and caring about the environment. They're like, oh, that's nice. You little do-gooder. And they give you something to eat, or like a bottle of water. And it was the suburbanite caught in the middle that didn't really have the best environment, but maybe they'd struggled to get it, and they're like, I don't know. I don't know why the suburbanites didn't seem to care as much. It was a really interesting thing, and so I long contemplated that empathy was a key. Whether you were living in it and it was your reality, and you knew the environment needed cleaned. There's another interesting story, though. In college one time, I had students who came from the city, the inner city, and they were horrified that there were too many trees on our college campus, and they they felt threatened by the amount of trees. So it was very interesting. So people in the city a lot of times will be fighting for the environment, but maybe they don't know what that reality is that they're fighting for. Are they just fighting for cleaner, what they have, cleaner air, cleaner water? Are they fighting to have big parks? Do they know what a wilderness looks like? And I think that's one of the real importances for providing those summer camps where kids can go away and be out in the wilderness, whether they be suburbanites or whether they be kids from the city. And let's throw in the rich kids who have the pristine environment, but maybe don't experience people who don't have that, and that we need to mix together to get that empathy. So that's where my mind was going into this book. And I very much took my little Franciscan heart. And I will say, I've written in this book, I thought I wasn't going to. I've written in this book way more than I usually do, and in ways that really surprised me. My key companion in this has actually been a pencil like this, because I need a very fine point. There's not a lot of room to write. So let me do a quick book walk, get you in here. What is it? They show you first other books he's done, who the publisher is. Small dedication, all the legalities over here. I'm trying to see quick if that is. Don't see if it's Kindle or anything else, but he does have some articles that he's used. He uses a lot of articles and other resources in here. Start out with a couple of quotes, and this is the one that intrigued me. Oh, I did a book walk on this the other day. Sorry, friends, I'll attach that in the beginning then, and then you'll be like, what is she doing? Yeah, so that one about black elk kind of drew me in. And so how's it going? I'm only on page 55 out of, and I'm just talking about text because there's a lot of resources in the back. We already looked at that in our book walk. 273. So I'm 55 out of 273. I'm not very far in, but I know this is going to be a long-term project, and so I just wanted to get this video out to you, especially on our Water Wednesday. Why am I writing so many notes? I think I talked about the Island of the Blue Dolphins. I was like, oh, I read that book as a kid. I remember nothing of it, but I thought it was enchanting. That in the beginning, he's talking about how he's been able to stay in the cabin, the little cottage of that author, and the effect it's had on him. In the beginning, I wasn't really, things weren't really jumping out at me until I got to this paragraph, which really speaks to what I just told you about my door-to-door canvassing days. It says here, to fully protect anything, we must know it, love it, act in mindful reciprocity, giving back to animals as they give to us. Engaging with animals and then telling our stories of these encounters can be beautiful acts. Our future with other animals and each other as individuals and within our society are in fact shaped by the stories we tell. They can offer redemption and hope if their heart is generous. In our everyday lives and in our organizational and civic policies, we can choose empathy over separation or superiority. And you could probably spend a long time just engaging, and it's not even the full paragraph, just engaging those few sentences. To protect anything, we must know it, love it, act in mindful reciprocity. I think it's funny that he substituted put animals in there right away. Giving back to animals as they give to us. Giving back as is given to us. You don't even have to put the animals in there, right? Engaging with animals and then telling our stories of these encounters can be beautiful acts. And I found myself when I was reading, I'm reading this on a very much a theological level. And so a lot of times I'm taking the word animal out. It's relationship with anybody. It's encounter in relationship with God. That's what I'm finding. He's actually weaving that very much into the book without outright saying that, and yet he is. Let's see if I can jump into the next one. It is interesting here, as we include more of Earth's creatures in our lives, the definition of family grows richer. I think that about secular Franciscans. The more secular Franciscans I add into my life, the richer my life gets. The next chapter is called The Aching Heart, and it really speaks to social media, overconnection, the epidemic of loneliness. But then down here, we're talking about that we're so connected, but we're not. And down here at the bottom, he has a study that says greater social connection can reduce the chance of early death by 50%. I'll let you read all this. And then he gets into the concept of species loneliness. Oh, wait. Let's go back. People who spend more time in front of screens and less time in face-to-face social interactions are more vulnerable to depression and suicide. And I think that's one of the reasons, even during the time of COVID, when I've had these videos, I've really tried to encourage you all. It's not like we could do face-to-face connections then. So I was saying, put as much as you can in the comments, and I started the Facebook group. The Facebook group is called Our Blooming Catholic Life with Deanna Williston and friends. So get out there and check that out. I know some of you are still staying at home. Various areas of the world are still in lockdown. So if you can't necessarily get face-to-face with people, start interacting more deeply with them in the comments and adding your suggestions. Try to do some video calls with your friends and things. Check in on them. And it includes species loneliness. All of us are meant to live in a larger community, an extended family of other species. And I'm like, bam, the Bible tells us that God created all the animals. He created man. He's not good for him to be alone. He wasn't good for him to be alone as a single man amongst all the species. And I don't think it would have been good for him to be completely alone. God created all the animals for him before he created man. So it's just interesting that it's in there. Parks with the most biodiversity have the greatest beneficial impact on human psychological health. While green spaces can bring joy and reduce our stress, our deep connection to other animals has a special power to deliver us from our isolation, both as individuals and as a species. So it's not just enough to have the trees. We have to have all the animals in it. I've been out there gardening, and as I'm ripping those vines and ground cover off, I feel a little guilty because there's such an animal community in there. There's like 50 different kinds of bugs and slugs and all kinds of great things. And so I'm making sure I'm putting back plants that they're going to enjoy and habitat for them, because there's so much around us. There's so much here. They talk about how we really need to move away from an age of loneliness and towards an age of connectedness. And it says, life is just so big, we tell each other stories about the most important things. I often wondered if I should study storytelling more, but there's so much here. And you can see, yes, more people are getting backyard animals. More people, especially during the pandemic, everybody was adopting dogs, right? People were really getting pets. Therapy animals abound everywhere. So we know that connection is there. Now he starts talking about the mind-altering power of a deep animal connection. This is where it got weird for me. I need to grab a little bookmark here. Let me grab a piece of this magazine here. Sorry, magazine. The habitat of the heart. He started talking about how we have different realities. We have biological, our private interior, and our shared interior. Right? We have different worlds. So the biological world, our habitat, land, air, water, flesh, things that support our personal biological needs. Then next we have our private interior life. It's very individualized for each of us, so our own personal experiences. But then it says the shared habitat of our heart, the shared interior, that empathy that lets an encounter with you come into my world and change me. And so that's what he talks a lot about in this book. They talk about encounter and dialogue. Over and over again, I will say that's what it's about, encounter and dialogue. And it's very interesting. If you can tell from my ugly, angry notes on this page, he does quote people from other traditions and a variety of scientists. So here when he's talking about the I-thou relationship, he did bring in some Catholics. And I will say I was not impressed with what he brought in. He brought in Buber talking about the sacredness of the I-thou relationship. And when I looked him up, it was a lot of von Balthasar, which is for me. Some people call Balthasar repackaged Swiss Calvinism. That gave us that whole dare we hope that there is no one in hell discussion, or did people were saying that Christ did not suffer in hell. You can get a whole lot of theological debates, but my point is the Catholicism that he's brought in, at least so far, when I've seen, is not what I would consider Orthodox Catholicism. It's something that's very much debated and argued about. So that kind of set a tone for me, and I really started looking for that. I started looking more and more, and I'll say I engaged it continually as he discussed. Each story, I'm realizing I'm making connections to theology. I'm going up, I'm stopping, saying, oh, that reminds me of this from the Bible, or this reminds me of that theologian. And I'm running out and looking those up. And so, to me, that is dialogue. A lot of people, or I will say a certain bishop recently said that politicians weren't coming to the table in a spirit of dialogue, because like he was willing to say, okay, maybe abortion is okay in this circumstance, but they weren't willing to ever say that abortion was ever wrong, and so they weren't truly dialoguing. He said dialogue was about being ready to compromise, and I don't feel that's true. I feel like that's a caricature of dialogue. Dialogue is going in and being able to learn from the encounter, not necessarily take the other person's position, but to learn from encountering them. So if I go in and I meet someone who has a completely different experience from me, whether it's religion, whether it's the color of their skin, it could be what country they were brought up in. I'm not, like, if I talk to somebody in Australia, I'm not going to suddenly like, whoa, Australia's everything, and I'm going to just go dress like them, talk like them. That's creepy. I'm not giving up everything. I'm not, oh, well, I'm going to do 50% of my things like them. Like, what's the percentage? No, but I may say, they make me to look at the world something slightly differently. Or, I have a friend in England now, and she'll say words that I don't understand, and I have learned from encountering that I need to say when I'm not quite sure what you mean, because sometimes I think I understand, but there's this nagging suspicion that I don't, and it's very humiliating to be like, I have no idea what you're saying, or to check. But I've learned sometimes to check, because they were like, oh, well, I'll watch my language. But how would you know what words of yours I'm not understanding? You're not going to know that until it could be too late, or you're like really annoyed with me because I'm not doing what you want, just because I don't understand. And so now I need to have some humility. That is a characteristic of dialogue, where I may learn something new from the encounter. I may be challenged in a new way. I'm not saying I'm throwing out my whole belief system. I'm not changing my whole life. But that little thing that I get from each encounter with someone does change me. And even more, what I get from each and every encounter with God that's the one that can completely change me. And yet it doesn't, because God knew me before I was even knit in my mother's womb. I am unique. I'm not saying that he wants to completely change me, but he wants to transform me into more me. That's the thing I've realized with this whole Franciscan journey and going deeper into my faith, that it was such a celebration. Even to find the secular Franciscans, I became more me. I feel like I was a character. Did I say that word? Yeah, okay, like a character, like caricature. There, now I wasn't even saying it right. A caricature of what I am now. And it's funny. Have you ever done that, friends, where you sit down and you draw out a timeline? And you put in the key, the peak experiences of your life, those things that you felt that transformed you, whether they were religious or not. And then you go back, and as you look at that timeline, oftentimes we turn back into the person we were as a very small child. But also, we become more us as we go along. And in a glorious way, those little traits that we have are being refined and perfected. Hopefully, that doesn't happen for everyone, but it's okay, because at any time you get polluted, right, you can be purified again, and that's one of the beauties in life. I mean, it's a little dangerous, it's a little scary, because you could get polluted again, but you could also be purified again from any and every encounter. And so it's one of the reasons, friends, I'm always encouraging people to go to adoration. And if you can't get to adoration, you don't have that ability, you can do adoration online. Is it the same thing? No. But have I encountered Christ through sitting and adoring him even through a live stream? I have. And so if I want to be purified, if I want to be changed in an encounter with Christ, I have to make sure I'm encountering Christ more. And again, we've talked about The Soul, the Apostolate so many times in this program. It is a beautiful book, but it's reminding you, you can't just get out and do work. You can't just get out and be a little social justice warrior without spending time with God. You need to continually spend that time with God, because I am a little nature nut, but that needs to be purified, because as I see it now, like nature, when I go out in nature, and even spending time with those little insects this weekend, or our dear little skink in the compost heap, I am changed, but I learn more about God the more I spend in His creation. And I'm not going to spend all my time outside. I'm going to go spend more time with Christ. Spend more time with God. Spend more time in prayer. It calls me into that. It doesn't call me away from it. It calls me deeper into that. And I'm looking forward to, as you know, you think you've come a long way. Sometimes you look back and you think you've come such an amazing long way, and you can barely recognize the person you used to be. Sometimes you're like, whoa, that got better. Okay, yeah. And then you stop and think, what am I going to think of myself, this self now, when I'm looking back 10 years from now, 20 years from now? Am I going to be more purified? Am I going to be more polluted? And it is important. I think in this book, Our Wild Calling, he's saying that kind of about nature, that we need to start with nature. If we want to make nature better, we need to have that encounter. And then we're either going to, from that encounter, he believes that we're going to keep purifying nature. We're going to keep purifying nature the more we encounter it. Which is just, that's so perfect, right, friends? That's natural law right there. The more we encounter God, the more we are purified. Our God is so good. Right there, friends, amazing grace showering down on us. So I'm not saying never read those books that maybe can be a little bit challenging. Maybe it's written by someone who's not in your faith, because you can learn from the encounter. I'm not saying you throw off all your customs, habits, and your religion because you read a book. Be intelligent about it. Challenge the book, but let it challenge you as well. Get some empathy. Oh, now I get what people are saying when they go out in nature so much. Those people who actually don't have religion or don't have a God, they are still called out to nature. It's still being revealed to them, and they're just not making those connections yet. And we need to have a little bit of empathy with them, but also maybe remember, invite them to church. Maybe nobody's asked them. I saw that in an interview with Scott Hahn the other day. It's one of the things that Protestants are so upset when they do come to the Catholic Church. They're like, why didn't anybody tell me? Why didn't anybody invite me? Why wouldn't you share this with me? At least ask me. I can say, I could have said no, but I might have said yes. So we need to get out there and, go ahead, encounter the world. I'm not saying go to the seediest places ever, but have some encounters. Let it change you. Have that dialogue. You have a firm foundation, and hopefully Saul the apostolate, you keep going back and refreshing it. Remember, the more you go out into the world, the more you need to also retreat and spend that time with God. Don't forget that. But there are some beautiful things that God may be willing and ready to reveal to you, and then take it back to Him. You can journal it. We've been talking about that lately. If you're in the Facebook group, we're studying Introduction to the Devout Life by St. Francis de Sales, and one of the practices that came up was really working on that daily examine. And I know I've been journaling mine out, some pluses to my day as well as some minuses, and I'm going through and just examining my day, imagining my day. And as I go through imagining my day, there's Ignatius spirituality in here. They don't know it, but there is. And so as I'm going through my day, I'm writing down my pluses and minuses, and I'm journaling about. So I'm really literally taking my day before the Lord. The things that were failures, I'm asking Him to help fix. And the things that were positive, I'm giving Him thanks for. And that's such a beautiful practice. And if I don't have time to fully engage the Lord on those points, at least I'm writing down the points. The next time I go to adoration, or if I go to Mass a little bit early or stay after Mass a little bit late, I can take those with me and really bring them before the Lord, literally in my little notebook, and go through them. God bless you, friends, for watching this long. This was meant to be a book review, but as you can see, I'm talking about the encounter with Christ. And sometimes you encounter Him in unexpected places. God bless you, friends. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.